Hey, hello. Um, so I guess I would like to start this video, by kind of explaining what I really want to do and convey with this format, I guess. So probably at the moment where this video will be released, first one would have been released where I explain why I stopped practicing as a neurologist. And I guess for me it would be some kind of way to approach some concepts I write about a lot. But the thing is, I write kind of more in a poetic language in French, so I guess it's another way to maybe explain some stuff that I might come up with in this practice of writing poetry in French. Some concepts that comes and flow quite naturally. So the practice comes from a way of play, I would say, of in a way it's like playing, because it comes from the developing of a musical practice, but finding a way to achieve kind of a state of trance. So it's kind of like a state of trance where I just put myself in this state of openness where I kind of let flow what's arriving in a way. And I would say it's like being when you're a child and you're just you're coming back to this kind of awareness of what can happen, and kind of just being in awe of what is happening and manifesting itself and taking form in front of you, and you're just oh, it's this thing that is happening, and so it leads to that, and so it leads to this other movement in music. You're okay, there is this note, and there are actually no mistakes, just openness and seeing, oh, this is happening, and so it's leading me in kind of in very enthusiastic mindset into this other lead, and it's just playing around and fooling around into this piece. And sometimes there are forms that are kind of crystallizing themselves, and you're coming back into the similar state multiple times over I guess a period of time, and at some point you're okay, it's coming back, and so it has consistency. Since it has consistency, maybe that's something that is that will have a name, or that will be what people would call a composition or whatever. So I guess I wanted to circle down what is about this mindset, how I approach it, and maybe, since we are all probably all people that will listen to that are other human beings, or that hear that and relate to that are other human beings, and I think we all share this common ground of possibilities, and that is one of those possibilities, in my opinion. So yeah, how do we go back to playing? How do we go back to fooling around without actively searching a state of productivity or achieving some kind of result? Um, and I just speak about my background about that because I, like in my years as being a neurologist or whatever, like a caretaker, I kind of like felt like whenever we go into this state of vulnerability to share something, like I guess it's easier for others to relate and just be in this like empathy kind of like frame. And since having this like empathic framework, we can just like be, instead of just as a caretaker just actively judge anybody else, might be like positive or negative judging whatever we feel about like a specific judgment or whatever, but just letting each of us find his own way in some way, which is also like a practice of improvisation, I would say. So how do we get back to playing? I would say that, yeah, I've been for a long time in a kind of like having difficulties to face productivity as a way of being. Like I had a lot of like I was putting to myself a lot of pressure, and usually when you do that, you have a lot of like expectancies about yourself, but also about others that are like surrounding you, and I couldn't very much separate what whatever was good, or whatever was good to me to just, I don't know, rely on or not. And difficulties to just loosen my grip, just being like, okay, this doesn't work, so I need to, in a way, just let it go. So that was kind of like a program that was like unreachable for me, and I think it came from a very kind of like anxious, like if we speak about relationships toward or other human beings and the world in general, like I had a very anxious relationship to the rest of the world, like and so a lot of difficulties to just let things be, and also like be in this kind of like present time, like being just conscious and aware of what was going on in the present, and always like kind of like either thinking about like crystallized regrets or doubts about like situation that had happened to me, and that I would see kind of like in a victim position, like I was identifying myself as a victim, and also like being very stressed about the future, and what might happen, or what I would possibly lack, or what I would possibly like be missing for the rest of my life or whatever. And so that, like, of course it's not completely, I would say, resolved. It's like an ongoing process, and I'm doing a lot to be conscious of it as of this day, but yeah, it's getting better and better, so that's why I want to share the practice. But yeah, it led not a lot of time to just be there and present in flow, I would say, just like being in this position where you're just like either sad or either happy or just in flow, or just you feel like now more and more I have this like sensation that everything is kind of like an alignment, and what I'm doing is what I should be doing in the moment, because I have like focus, I have consciousness, I'm there, I'm just doing it without thinking about like the results or the outcome or whatever. It's just like it's happening, and since it's happening in a way, things tend to take an outcome that is like way better for me in some way. Like I don't want to like use good, bad, better, whatever, or moral frameworks a lot, moral skills to think about those things, but I guess it's just like it feels right. It feels like aligned with what should take form in my life, because I feel like happiness, and whenever it's like more difficult times or more challenging times, sometimes I feel sadness, but at least I feel it, and I don't dissociate as I was sometimes before. So the practice, I would say, is, I guess I was very deeply influenced by, like, I guess Sufi poets and thinkers that were kind of like sharing how you, like us as human beings, can reach kind of like divine states by repeating a sequence of movements. So maybe you have like this image of like what we call in French derviche tourneur, which is like those dancers coming from the like Middle East, and like practically a lot, like there are like very known spots, for example in Turkey, and those people like just turning on themselves and reaching state of like state of trance, in fact, and experimenting the divine in themselves and the world outside themselves. And so there are also like famous poets, there are famous musicians as well, and just like having this practice of I guess more and more letting go of the need of identity, while being just immersed in a practice or a movement. And so more and more I did it like in like more like collective settings, like playing music with other like improviser, and finding my way also by myself, and like sometimes being just in some kind of cathartic after work kind of state, like being just like, oh, I need this break and I need to immerse myself. And yeah, I guess it led more and more to a deeper and deeper state, and as the states of mind and practice evolved, I could see that my life was more and more leaning towards challenges that were like kind of how you can relieve yourself from from a productivist mindset, I would say. And more like I had like choices to make about feeling less and less and needing less and less like security, but I would say like toxic security, because very much like loosening the grip of like the identity labels you put, or the attempt, what you wait about like situation or relationship, and the identity labels you put on yourself and others, So more and more, like, I discovered like different practices that were kind of similar to the musical practices I had. I started to do yoga. I started to meditate, and each of those practices had more like writing, a lot of improvisational writing, drawing. Like each of those practices had me kind of relating to a different past and memory. Like kind of like those were practices that were kind of like shared by ancestors, or that had kind of like a historical frame, um, like in my family, but kind of like very shadowy historical frame, because those things, like not a lot of people do them, those practices currently in my family. um, and also they were like kind of a way for me to arouse a link, a relationship to let's say intuition, or more like conceptualization for the writing, intuition for the music, um, my body for the yoga, like meditation or writing were also very much linked with my emotions. And so kind of like interconnection in between those very different parts of myself that were very shattered before, and not in balance, I would say. So more and more it was kind of like a state of mind that I could generalize in my days, like while going into my day I would just be in this state of connecting to my breath and just being like conscious about and mindful about what was going, like what I was doing at the moment, just being like, okay, do I still want to engage in this conversation? Do I still want to be here? Do I want to leave to another place? Do I want to go on doing this? It is the right time to write. Is it the right time to play music? What do I feel like doing? What do I need now? Thinking about relationships, like oh, is like this conversation, what does it say, what's behind it? And so I guess it's kind of like a way of being that is like way more anchored in what's going on at the moment, and what you really feel like doing or need at the moment, or what is like kind of a limit or something that is like you don't want to go on being confronted to, but not in a avoidant kind of place, but more like, okay, maybe I'm worth more than being confronted to this kind of relationship or this kind of situation. And it's more like that I feel it was like taking roots. So how do we start back playing? I would say it's like each step after the other, like just taking each day as a like as a new life has, because I guess what was very much in the way to be in this position of being open to whatever was the result or the outcome, and just open to the forms manifesting themselves. What was in the way were a lot of like fixed identities that I had, about being, I don't know, a male, about being mixed race, about being a doctor, about being I don't know, many other things, and or or being a Sagittarius, or being, it's also kind of all the frameworks we can kind of try to use to make sense of how we are like putting ourselves in the world, and it being very much scary and frightening, because there is a big risk of a lot of things. We kind of need to be aware, and we kind of need to like to avoid hazards, but also like to not dissolute in all the different relationships and all the different possibilities we could have. So yeah, just being in this state of like openness to evolve about what I thought was me, because that's all about that. It's like how I was like kind of finding safety in those identities, like, and how at some point those identities became my own prison that I created to myself, and with a lot of narratives of like victimhood and pain and difficulties, and how the world was treating me. And at some point you just attract to situation where you find yourself back in this position of the victim. Like my way of getting out of it, like of perpetual like iteration. I don't know if you like reiteration, like traumas coming back and back in your life. My way out of this was to like understand what was the root, like the root of the trauma, or the symbolic essence of the trauma, and what was the event that led to it. It being like, I don't know, maybe a transgenerational trauma, or like an unpleasant and traumatic experience that happened to me, and how that was like conditioning me to in those fixed identities, and in a way in my relationship, and how those relationships were just like recreating the perfect condition for the trauma to happen back. I think if you can be open about those relationships to yourself and your identity, and find a way to have moments where you are like kind of aware that you need the security of identity, and sometimes just you can dissolve it to just recreate new links and new boundaries and new way of like behaving and going out in this like frightening world. I think that's a big win, because you can play with it, you can like accept the improvisation back in your life. So I made this video because I accepted back improvisation in my life, and I still want to be pursuing my life as an improvisator. I find it like very amusing, and it's leading me to moments of like frightening vertigo, and sometimes like deep ow, and deep happiness, I would say, and love and poetry. And so I guess it's a behavior or possibility that we all have, and that's good if like people choose not to engage in that, or that's good if this is not the path for some people. That's not very much like a recipe I'm telling now. Like It's just like sharing experiment, and maybe you will like resonate with this, and maybe not. And that's completely alright. So yeah, I will sending you a lot of love. I guess I'm gonna make other moments like this and put like images on it because I find it very beautiful. Or I guess I don't find it very beautiful because I didn't do it yet, but it's more like I'm called to that. Like I feel a calling to that, and this is the form my life is taking right now, I guess. So, see you.